Welcome back to Growth Without Referrals, the podcast where leaders talk honestly about what's actually working to win new clients beyond word of mouth. I'm Mark Ferguson, and today I'm joined by Brian Wygle of helpformycompany.com. Brian is an operator and a business fixer who spent decades helping companies solve hard problems, not just operational and financial issues, but the leadership and family dynamics that can quietly break a business. He also helps owners get their companies ready to sell, what he calls fix it to sell it, so they can exit without becoming the employee in the business they just sold. Brian, welcome to the show. Brian, for people meeting you for the first time, how did you get into this work?
Well, I started out, got my real estate license when I was 21, and I was working in a real estate company, and I used to eat at a restaurant across the street from the office. And one day I said something to the manager about the poor service and the food wasn't doing so well, and he took his apron off and threw it on the table and said, "If you think you can run this place better, you do it." And so I met with the owner, and they put me in charge of the restaurant for about 6 to 8 months while I got it ready for the owner to sell. He was an absentee owner. Turned out that the manager wanted out anyways. So I just found that I had a little knack for fixing the issues and getting all the employees motivated. And then while I was at the real estate business, I found that I did not have an affinity for selling houses. I was more interested in the deal, the numbers. I didn't like open houses and baking cookies. So I ended up gravitating to their mortgage department. And then from there, I followed my manager, my boss, to a finance company that was doing business financing. I kept seeing clients getting turned down for money. And so I kind of set about how do I help these clients because they obviously, there's reasons the bank doesn't want to lend them money. And so I left the finance field from there and ended up taking on clients and helping them get ready, trying to find out what the problems were. And I often found that money was not the issue. People just think, oh, some more money or a loan from the bank will fix my problems. And they just needed to get fixed, if you will. So that became, I just started getting business from that. People would say, hey, I need help. Eventually gravitated, went and got my securities licenses and became an investment banker because I found that a lot of my clients, you couldn't fix it and hand it back to them. They would just screw it up again. So I began the concept of fixers, fixing it to sell, just like you would fix up a house and flip it, put it on the market or whatever. Actually ended up buying one of my clients and flipped it and sold it pretty successfully. And that 10 years ago, the regulatory environment of being an investment banker and securities licenses, I was spending more time with all of that than I was actually with my clients. So I just started doing the consulting part of it all and not the transactional side. Although I do get involved, I don't go out and find buyers and sellers. When somebody says they want to sell their business, I help them get it ready to sell. I will help them find the right broker or investment banker, and I will be with them through the process. But, I don't get involved. And that allows me to partner up with investment bankers who have clients they'll come call me and say, we can't sell this. It's not ready, or we can't get enough money for it, or the owner is just not ready. There's a lot that goes into becoming ready to exit your business. So that was where I kind of landed. And then during COVID, when we were all stuck at home, I started doing more online work, Zoom meetings and all of that. And I really felt that was where I wanted to be because flying all over the country, I go to a client for a one-day meeting in Chicago. They're going to have to pay for my airfare, a hotel room, pay for that full day, all of that. And I felt that was really unfair when a couple of 1-hour sessions in a week we can be more specific to the issues. We can be uninterrupted, and I only have to bill them for that time. And so that has become kind of my model is more virtual, more online, and hence the helpformycompany.com. It's kind of my amalgamation of how to put it all together in a way that benefits the clients and myself.
Okay, Brian, I love it. And you built a fix it to sell it approach, and walk us through what sellable actually means.
Okay. Well, the first step is making sure that the business is running at maximum potential. Hopefully, we get started. We're not doing it where sale is imminent in 3 weeks. We want some time to go through and make sure that pricing is good, that they're making money on their product, that they've eliminated any unnecessary overhead, that they're investing their time, effort, and money in the things that improve value. A lot of business owners spend a lot of money or take a lot of money out of their business through various sources, car payments, that kind of stuff. So we do what we call recasting. We look and say, okay, if you were not the owner, if a new owner came in, how much money is actually available to them?
Hmm.
And so we look at that. We look at infrastructure. Does the company run well? And then most importantly, as the owner, are you emotionally ready, physically ready to be away from this business? I've experienced, I've got a client right now that we sold the company I guess we closed in July, and they're still working there. And the company really can't run without them because they didn't take my advice and bring in, prior to the sale, the next round management that can run a business. If you can't be away from your business, you're not going to be successful selling it. And so we get them emotionally ready. If they don't have a financial advisor to plan their retirement or what to do with the money, I'll put them in touch with quite a few that I've vetted, one or two that I particularly like who are in this area. But it's kind of a holistic approach. Are we running maximum potential? Are you ready to sell? Both the company's ready, you are ready. One of the things I like to do with my clients when we get everything together and start running is I say, I need you to take 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, and not talk to anybody in your business. And if it can't run without that input, it can't run without you, and therefore you're going to end up having to stay. And yes, you may have a transition period to bring the new owners up to speed, but I've seen a lot of people walk away from the table because they just realize I'm not ready to sell my business, or I'm not ready to transition my business to the next generation. A lot of it is not selling the company. It's, a son or daughter who is going to take over the business, or several family members. Do you have things in structure in place for them to be able to take the business over and run it, get along, not cause any family issues? So we look at all of that type of thing. A lot of times somebody will have a great business and they're ready to hand it down to their kid. And my advice is the kid's just not ready. And that kid may be 40 years old, but he's not ready. What's his mentality? Is he as enamored with the business as you are? Does he understand it? Has he worked there long enough? A lot of times people will come in and run a business or take over a business from their parents, and they have not been in the business. They've been in another industry or something. And then they come in, and that can cause problems. And it can cause problems amongst the family members. So we spend a lot of time working through that. Frankly, a lot of times they're in some kind of crisis mode, and that's why they're looking to sell or get out. Things are broken, or there's a broken relationship. I have a client right now that there's 3 family members. There used to be 4, one passed away, and they frankly don't get along. So I had to step in and basically run the company for them until we could find someone who they could, that I could train to run the business so that they wouldn't kill each other trying to run the business. So, that's kind of where I'm at in Fix It to Sell It. And the reason, as I said, is people often unless they've really learned to think differently, they're going to go back in and they're going to start, undoing what we did because it's too hard. So my point is get out while the getting's good. I used to have a little aside, and I'll tell you this story quickly. For several years, I owned a cattle ranch in Arizona. And one of the old guys I was talking to, I said, we had a horse that limped. And I said, what do you do with a horse that limps? And he said, you shoot it up through painkillers and you take it to the auction and you sell it when it's not limping. I kind of thought about that in relationship to business. You fix it up and you sell it and you get out while the getting's good. If you really can't fix it, then maybe you have to sell it to somebody who can.
Okay. So, Brian, if we have a founder that's listening and wants to exit in 2 to 3 years, what's step one?
Well, obviously, contact me. Step one is, and it's the same thing with anything, take a step back and look at your business as an outsider. Look at how others would perceive your operations, your products, your employees, and give yourself a good assessment and see if you see something that you don't normally see every day. That's step one. And it really is about assessing, what's my vision? What am I going to do when I sell it? would somebody else, would a buyer find it as attractive as I do? Or at least did when I was starting. What makes this business attractive to buyers? Is it financial? Somebody who's going to buy it for the income, or is it a great add-on to some industry? I sell a widget to another manufacturer, and they think it would be better to buy it from me. That's the first step, and then from there is getting all your ducks in a row, making sure you have all your documentation in place, that you have an owner's manual that you can hand over to someone who says, this is everything you need to know about our business. How's it going to impact the culture here under a new owner? Am I 100% of the business and I just have 10 employees who are support for me? If so, we're going to have to change that culture, because when I'm gone, they're going to have to be more involved. And so, looking at that and making the assessment as objectively as you can. And that's kind of where someone like myself comes in, because we can ask the questions. We can challenge their assumptions, and we can look at it as an outsider and say, okay, here's why it's really attractive. Here's why it's not. Here's where we can increase value, that type of thing. And it's like I said, the longer the process, the longer time we have before they move on, the more success we're going to have in getting everything ready and changed over. And that makes it available to a larger number of potential buyers as well, because, it's a business that can run itself.
Hmm.
I'm big on that. If you can't, like I said, if you can't be away from your business, if you're the sole salesman and manufacturing manager and, everything else, and it's all in you and all you've got is a secretary, somebody else might not want to buy that job. They're looking to buy a company.
Yes. And Brian, a few minutes ago, you talked about this, that many of your clients are family-owned businesses. And sometimes the issue isn't operational, it's family crisis and psychology. And what's your approach when emotions are driving the strategy?
Again, when emotions are driving the strategy, the best thing that I can do is sit down with each person and talk through and get their perspectives, find out what the common ground is, and find out why that emotional aspect or whatever it is a barrier, and see if there isn't a way to work towards the common and take the emotion out of it. Looking at the process, looking at the actual facts, trying to get, and I say this more as a generalization, the biggest problem with change management is changing the way people think. You can change processes, you can change all kinds of things, but if you can't change the way people think, then they can't move on. And so hopefully I can give them new insight, both into themselves, into what's causing the dynamic. Sometimes I tell them they need some real psychological help. Other times it's just getting them down with a referee, if you will, to talk through the issues and to try and focus, like I said, on what's in common and what's best for the business. If the business is the crisis, no problem. If the business is the problem, then do we eliminate the business? Do we bring somebody else in to run it so that the family has time to heal, work through the issues? Or is it more a situation where the family problems are causing problems with the business? If the family problems are outside the business, somebody just doesn't like each other, somebody hurt their feelings, somebody got divorced, so, all of those things. But if the problem is the business, then let's focus together on fixing the business without the emotion of it. And we'll continue to talk through the emotions, but we're going to focus on what needs to happen for the business.
Okay. So, Brian, what's one hard truth you tell owners that they usually don't want to hear?
One hard truth. I think I go back to, and I say this probably at least once or twice a week. It's a quote from Einstein, and he says, you can't fix a problem using the same thinking you used to create the problem. And so we're going to have to learn to think differently if we're going to solve this problem. And that is really hard for people who are married to their business and think they've done everything they can to run, to make things right. So again, like I said, any kind of change management, fixing it, transitioning it, starting it, growing it, you're managing change in the business. The first thing that has to happen is you're going to have to think outside of your normal thinking. And that is very difficult. And when clients do not succeed in achieving what they're aiming for, it is usually because they can't change their thinking.
Okay.
So that's my biggest challenge, and probably what I provide the best is to help them see different ways, to challenge them to have a light bulb moment where they go, okay, now I get it.
Okay. So, Brian, let's talk growth. Your work is different from project-based consulting. You said your business has historically been driven by perceived need.
Right.
People reach out when they're in trouble, but now you're building a more portable model. And how do you create a greater sense of need without being salesy?
Well, so 99% of my business has always come from somebody referring someone, saying, okay, an attorney saying, hey, I have a client that really needs to talk to you. As the world is changing, I'm working on my business model to let the internet be the referral source. So all of what my marketing is building trust through the internet, emailing, virtual contact, driving them towards the website, which is not a beautiful, whiz bang website. It's more informational. Here's who I am. Here's how I can help. Here's some articles to read. Here's a couple of links to some podcasts that will help. And if you feel comfortable with me, book a free consultation and we'll talk. And so that's really become more of my model, where my referral source is more visibility on the internet.
Okay.
And so I'm working on that. I'm having to learn to outsource some of that, good SEO guy, looking at marketing people that can get it. Because like you said, I'm not a project-based consultant, not an IT guy. I'm not a finance guy. I know all of those things because I have to work with all of that. But, somebody's not searching for a QuickBooks expert or an AI expert when they look for me. But then, and that's kind of why the name helpformycompany.com came about, is if somebody's Googling, where do I find help for my company? We're working to drive our name up to the top of that through our, what we're doing on the website. I have an SEO guy who keeps it very dynamic, and, he's on me every day to put something on there so we can update it and all of that. So content. And the ability for growth for me, the opportunity for growth, is to get away from strictly the referral, waiting for an accountant or an attorney or someone to say, hey, I hear your problem. Why don't you call Brian? I mean, I still appreciate that. I still want that. But as the world is changing, people are more looking online. They're looking at YouTube videos for answers. And so that's one of the reasons I've agreed to do podcasts, is so that, hopefully they'll come upon me when they're looking for that. And that opportunity, by going virtual, allows me to not be locked into one client for a week because I'm traveling to go see them. I mean, there are times when I have to do that. But it allows someone to just say, hey, I just need to talk to this guy, see if he gets what I'm talking about. That's why, I just tell them, book a free consultation. We'll talk for an hour. And if you feel the need to, keep going, then we'll develop a plan and a schedule and a budget, and we'll keep going. If I need to come out there to see you, fine. And what that does is allows me a greater marketplace, because I'm not trying to find clients just in my general area. When I was younger, I traveled all over the country. I was away from my family, spending weeks at a time with clients. And sometimes that's necessary for a given situation. But nowadays, you could hop on a Zoom call with me for an hour a day, every day of the week, and it would still be cheaper than paying for me to come out there and be there. And and if you're in financial problems, I don't want to be part of that problem by now. How am I going to pay this guy? So it allows me to spread my message, if you will, actually internationally. I was on a podcast in Great Britain earlier this week, somebody asked me for outreach to some companies in their area. And it allows me to break down those barriers, which brings me growth without having to add infrastructure. So, and I'm learning a lot about AI, about how to use AI to, in several facets of my business. The AI lead generation may or may not be where I tend to go, because mine is more fuzzy, touchy-feely. I perceive I need this. It's hard. It's not like I can say to AI or hire someone to say, find me all the leads and contact everybody that runs IBM computers or whatever. It's it's a little more esoteric. And so that's been the challenge for me in how to utilize technology better, in particular AI, in those areas. I do
Okay.
use it for research. Somebody will tell me about their company and I'll do a deep dive into their industry and
Hmm.
into the company and everything I can find on social media about that person. I do use AI for that. I use it for idea generation. If I'm stuck on an idea, either for an article or an idea for a plan for one of my clients, I will use AI to kind of get me kickstarted. I don't let it do all the work for me because they're paying for my brain. If they just needed AI, they could do it themselves. So I'm learning to use that technology, which makes me much more
Okay.
efficient.
Yes.
The marketing and lead generation is something I'm looking at, but like I said, it's a little more complicated given
Hmm.
what I do. My business or my website starts with every business goes through several cycles. I don't know if you have seen the website, but it's startup, it's growth, it's stabilization, it's distress, and it's exit. And in those 5 areas, I can provide something very specific because it's not one size fits all. If you're just starting a business, let's make sure you start it right. Let's make sure you have a good plan so you can avoid the distress. If you have a stable business, how do we work to improve your employees? Are you stable because you're plateauing before you grow, or are you stable because you're kind of running out of steam and you're thinking about either getting out or you're heading for trouble? Each one of those phases has something specific that I can provide to the client. And so my goal is to use those and drive people to the website, look at, say, oh, okay, I'm in this stage and he can do this for me in this stage. So I'm going to give him a call and let the
Okay.
website do the work. And like I said, it allows me to grow. If I spend 8 hours in a day with one client, I make a certain amount of money, but some of that's wasted time and I'm not with anyone else and I'm not perpetuating the business. If I do 4 virtual meetings with 4 different clients for an hour each or whatever, I'm working less, gives me more time to do what I need to do behind the scenes with my clients. They're paying less. I'm making the same amount of money than one client because there's always a ceiling. If you're there for 8 hours, but you're only doing 4 hours worth of work for them, there's a certain point where you just can't bill them for all of that. I'm not that cynical. So,
Right.
and so
Okay.
that's where my growth is going to come in, is relying, as an old guy, relying on technology. I'm trying to stay up on it as best as I can. And
Well, Brian, you're not an old guy. Okay.
well, I'm older than I look. I'm going to be 67 coming up soon. You can't put 40 years in the business and be a youngster. And I think that's something I'm embracing and trying to push to my clients is I'm not a young buck coming in to tell you what I learned in business school.
Hmm.
I've done this. I've repeated this. I've made mistakes. I've had clients that have made it. I've had clients that we just couldn't do anything. I've been through it all. And, I've got 40 solid years of actual hands-on, either running the business or advising it. I'm not textbook, and I'm not orthodox by any stretch of the imagination in the way I deal with my clients and how I solve problems.
Okay. Brian, what's a belief about leadership you hold that most people disagree with?
That most people disagree with. Well, hopefully after talking to me about it, they don't disagree out anymore. I love acronyms, mnemonics that help people remember things. One of the ones that I use that I think probably people would disagree with, business owners and leaders probably would disagree because they think they know better. My acronym is PAIR, PAIR. When you want to be the leader and build a team and actually have the team work, the first one is participate. You can't just have a team that works independent of you and you're doing your own thing. And that's hard for leaders because they want to be out in front, kind of leading. And I always say the definition of a leader is someone who has followers. You can call yourself a leader all you want, but if they're not following you, you're not leading. And just because you're the owner, just because you're the boss, may not mean you're the leader in that pack, in that group. So participate. The second one is anticipate. You've got to be thinking ahead of the people that you are working with. I hope I don't draw a blank here. All of a sudden, old age. Participate, anticipate, instigate,
Okay.
You got to be the one that starts things. And you've got to, start with, I have a dream. I have a vision. I think we're going to go here. This is where we're going. You instigate. And the last one is the R, is reciprocate, is kind of you do for me, I do for you. I use that acronym in my relationship with my wife, for example. Participate, anticipate, instigate, and reciprocate. It's a key to a healthy relationship, whether it's a leader and their followers, whether it's, an ad hoc team, whether you're, involved in school, church, work, whatever it is. I find that that's a good way to say, these are the things you should be involved in. And, I have had some quote unquote leaders who have said, yeah, no, I don't participate in all of that. That's for the employees. I had a client once that told me point blank, I think the employees are just people who are in between me and my money, and they're a necessary evil. And I was in his attorney's office with him, and fortunately, I didn't have to say anything because his attorney did, but that was his perspective. And trying to get him to change and to see that was very complicated. So that's kind of the pair thing, is something I implement a lot. And it's not a rah-rah speech. I mean, it really is a drill down. Are you involved with your client, with your employees, the people that are following you? Are you ahead of them in your thinking? Are you creating new ideas? Are you looking at new opportunities? Are you instigating? And again, are you reciprocating? If they do for you, are you rewarding them when you benefit? A lot of owners are slow to give their employees raises or to share rewards with them. I pay you what you get paid, and all the profit goes to me. But it goes beyond money.
It does.
These people have committed themselves to you. Have you committed yourself to them? Are you truly a team? If you're not reciprocating, you're not part of the team. And I have a little saying when it comes to participating. If you're not participating, the rest is just air. It's just AIR. So there you go.
There you go. Okay, Brian, what's one sign a business is heading towards trouble before anyone admits it?
Okay, that's an easy one. There are two factors depending on which kind of trouble they're heading into. The first one is financial. And so the thing we look at is what you call the book to bill ratio. And that is new orders booked as a ratio to what you're invoicing. So if you're invoicing more than you're bringing in future business, you're heading downward. So if you look at a 90-day cycle, which is typical in most businesses, if I'm not booking more orders than I'm invoicing, I either A, have a production problem, or B, I'm not getting the invoices out, or I'm not bringing in enough new business and I'm not growing. So from a financial standpoint, that's one key thing to look at. If the problem is more a people problem, I'm looking at disgruntled employees, employee morale, and customer satisfaction. So that's kind of the metrics there. But the number one thing that kind of overshadows all of that is the mental health and the attitude of the owner. If I talk to someone who, even though they think the business is going great, they're not excited about it, they're kind of disengaged, I sense that they're pondering, maybe they're churning things at home, that's a sign that there's some problem there. You're dragging your work home at night and you're complaining to your wife about work, or you're mentally drained when you leave work. That's a sign that things aren't going the way they should, whether it's financial or not.
Right. Well, Brian, this has been fantastic. Where should people go if they want to learn more about your work?
Well, the first place is www.helpformycompany.com, and that's basically my resume, marketing material, and secretary all in one place. And they can contact me through there. They can read the services. There's some articles there that might give them a little insight into my thinking that would help them know me better. And as I said, I'll be starting to post podcast links, so I'll be happy to post a link to your podcast as well, and so people have another way to find your podcast and myself.
Perfect. Brian Wygle, thank you for coming on Growth Without Referrals.